Welcome to Raw Vision, and we've got another Richo feature here today. We're joined by our recruiting officer, the guru, the man who gets the talent into the club, Francis Jackson. Great to have you here, Francis. Tell us your assessment of last year's national draft.
Well, overall, obviously we'd be pretty pleased with how the boys have tracked since they've been here. Reece had an injury and really didn't get started till January, so he missed a significant amount of pre-season. So for him to play round one was a terrific achievement. He's obviously a very talented player who we see having a major impact in the years to come. He's very mature and got really strong leadership skills as well. Jake is a very mature young man, and his ability to read the play and understand footy has been a terrific bonus for him. He just sees things unfolding before him, and I think in round one he had the second most intercept possessions from opposition kicks in his first game, which is really impressive. And obviously we think he's going to be a long-term player. And Brad Helbig, again, he had an interrupted pre-season, missed a fair bit of it. So for those three boys to play and all play a role in the early part of the season is terrific for our future and also for their development.
Okay, mate. Well, they're the guys that have played in the first few rounds and done really well. Tell us about the other draft selections, though, how they're tracking.
Dean McDonald, who's a kind of small forward who's got a bit of work to do in terms of his fitness base, and that was the reason why he's kind of started off a little bit slowly, given that he's had experience in a couple of NAB Cup games, which is fabulous for his development. And he's coming along nicely, but he's going to take a little bit of time for that reason, physically and his endurance base. And Tommy Derricks was going along very nicely, and perhaps had it not been for injury, would have been a contender to play senior footy already. He's got a bruised heel, which has slowed him down.
Well, now that the season's started, give us a little bit of an idea of what the recruiting staff are up to and how a weekend is shaped for those guys.
Our season's been well and truly underway. We go to all the TAC practice games and practice games around Australia to get an insight as to what's out there. So, just for example, last week, Matt Clark, he's one of our full-time recruiters. He's responsible for Adelaide. Yeah. So he went on Friday, saw 2 games Friday, 3 on Saturday and 3 on Sunday. Yeah. So he had an 8-game weekend, which is the most you can see. Yeah. Richard was in Perth on Friday for 2 games, 3 games on Saturday, flew back, got back at 1 a.m. and was at Optus Oval for a triple header on Sunday for 3 long games. And I had TAC. I caught 5 TAC games live, 2 at Ballarat and then 3 at Optus Oval. So it's particularly important this time of year to be out and about attending as many games as possible before the school kids go out of the TAC Cup and get back into their school competition. So I think most of them play 4 to 5 rounds of TAC before they go back to their school comps, which involves a lot of kids. So it's very important to get a good handle on them early as possible.
Your recruiting plan for the year, Francis, give us an idea of when you have a look at that and how it's mapped out for the rest of the season.
Well, our overall philosophy is early on we have a massive whiteboard in our office and we just put up names and identify as many kids as we can with AFL traits, albeit it might only be 1 or 2 or it might be a significant number. Yeah. So our first third of the year basically is just identifying kids with AFL traits. Yeah. Then our second third of the year, we kind of become a little bit more selective and filter through those names, putting some up to a definitely draftable kids up the top of the board, follow kids in the middle, and some kids slip off into the bin. So that's the philosophy we undertake, and I think it's, we spread the net as wide as possible early on and then become more selective as we approach the draft.
Give us an idea of the attributes that you look for in a player, Francis.
Obviously, the modern game requires a vast array of talent, but first and foremost, it's their skill level, their actual footy skills. So we hone in on them and take a great deal of notice on their actual disposal skills, their decision-making and their ability to understand footy and read the play. And from there, if they can, tick the box in that particular area, we move on to their physical attributes and whether they're suited to playing AFL footy and what are their strengths and weaknesses and whether their weaknesses might be improvable in that particular area, whether it be strength, for example. And then finally we move on to the mental aspects and whether they've got the capacity to compete and endure the rigours of AFL footy.
Well, you took Jack Riewoldt at number 13 in the 2006 National Draft. Were you surprised that he was still around at that stage?
It's funny, I think in every year when you rate a player highly, you kind of find it hard to see how others don't rate that particular player, and that was actually my first draft and my first pick, so it was a long wait because we actually traded from pick 8 to 13 for Graham Polak, and we rated Jack highly right throughout the year and thought he had immense talent, albeit needing to improve some of his physical attributes as I talked about before. And we followed him closely, and we're delighted to be able to have him at the footy club. Obviously, he's taken a little while to develop, as we know the bigger boys do, and as I mentioned, he needed to address some physical aspects of his game, but I think from early on we realised he was going to be a player. It was just going to take time. So.
We know that footy's pushing into some new boundaries, and Richmond, we're starting to look at Papua New Guinea. We've actually already got a couple of recruits up there that we're looking at.
That was something we looked at a couple of years ago, realising that perhaps the talent pool might shrink because of the new teams. Yeah. We also had a good in PNG because Ray Hall, past player, was there for a couple of years, so he gave us a good insight as to what was happening in PNG, and he was involved in some of the junior programs. So we've been really active over there for the last few years, and last year we signed 2 PNG boys, 15-year-olds, which enabled us to actually send them to a boarding school, which is fantastic for those boys and their families, because I think the average wage in PNG is about 4,000, and their actual boarding fees are 4,000, so we subsidise that, so it's a tremendous opportunity for the boys to gain education and also pursue their footy. We've had them out here a couple of times, and they'll be back throughout the year, so it's very exciting, particularly the first time the PNG boys came over. It was terrific.
We've been looking at Ireland for a long time now. Of course, we've got Jamie O'Reilly at the club, and we've just signed another 18-year-old over there in John Heslin. Tell us a bit about him.
Yeah, that's it's been very interesting. We thought we'd have a look over there at Ireland, and then spending a little bit of time over there, you realise how close the Gaelic game is to our game and their decision making, their running skills and the way they play. So we identified Jamie O'Reilly as having some athletic traits, and he was a terrific kid with a strong desire to learn and to be the best he can. And for him to play the last 3 games last year in 2010 in his first year of footy was just staggering, really. And we thought that he's going to progress further. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but he showed some really promising signs. So we went back earlier this year, and fortunately found a kid who was a little bit younger than Jamie, but nonetheless very independent, kid who's living away from home doing agricultural science. Physically, he was terrific, and he dominated some major university cup games over there in Ireland, but also plays senior county footy at 18, which is highly unusual. So we brought John and his father over and showed him around the club and what the club was all about, and thankfully he signed a contract to play with us next year, so we hope to have him out here later on in the year. But look, we're genuinely excited about his prospects. He's got fantastic physical attributes, and again, he's very, very passionate about his sport and very keen to learn, and he's a multi-talented kid that's excelled in other sports. So he was actually texting me while I was sitting in he was in a university lecture during our Friday night game about the score, so look forward to him coming to the club later in the year.
From a recruiting perspective, how difficult has it been with the Gold Coast coming in this year and Greater Western Sydney entering the competition next year?
Yeah, it's certainly made it a lot tougher because of the number of picked 17-year-olds that both those teams have taken out of the draft pool. I don't think the Gold Coast had a significant impact on us, although I must admit, walking out of last year's draft, we lost one player who I was very, very keen on getting, and really that was as a mid-round pick, who coincidentally has played senior footy for one of those stronger teams in the first 2 rounds. So we actually lost him, so really that was our contribution to the Gold Coast. But realistically, I think this year's draft will be a lot harder because of GWS's involvement, and actually the top rated kids are actually in the January to April window that enable them to pull them out of the pool. So I actually think this year's impact will be a lot stronger than the last year's one, purely because of the different dates of those kids that were pre-listed by Gold Coast and GWS.
Last one, Francis. How many talent spotters do you have around Australia looking at talent from week to week?
We have a network around Australia, but it's not a big network. I'm kind of a bit of a strong believer in having people that absolutely know their stuff and me not having to follow up on them. So if they actually view someone so they can play, then I trust their judgment. Obviously, we follow things up, but I don't think big networks are all that workable. And if you have people that really know their stuff and can get across multiple games, then the size of your network is not so crucial. Obviously, you need to cover Australia and some of the smaller competitions, which we do adequately, but we don't have an overly large network, but we certainly are well resourced in that area and have people actually have a good handle on their footy and know their stuff in terms of recruiting. Be surprised at the number of people that think they know what they're talking about when it comes to recruiting, but really they talk about the present, they don't talk about the future, and that's really the difference between someone who is a good recruiter and actually can see the wood through the trees, so to speak.
Well, thanks, Francis. Thanks for being on Raw Vision today and giving the Tiger fans a perspective of what it's like to be a recruiter.